Hi, welcome to another podcast from me and Wallace, the Messed Up Counsellor. If you like and share these podcasts, then other people who you connect to might find them really stimulating, because sometimes we don't know what other people are going through and we don't know where they are in the world and life. They show us one aspect themselves, and then there may be other things that they're going through. So you never know whether or not these podcasts will help them or not. But at least if you're given the option, then that would be a good thing. So today what we're going to talk about is insecurity and growing up, which I cover more in the book Insecurity, It's All About Me, which is available on Amazon. When we're growing up, we are given the world in our first 10, 11 years, usually by parental figures, peer media stuff, anything really where we get information from. Mostly the parental figures, family figures, the people close to us are the ones we get the main messages of how the world works, if you like. We're not born with the world. So when we're going through that process, usually, more often than not, we take that as being the world. We take that as being how the world works and how we should be in the world and how we should connect to that world. So we have their rules, ideas, and processes within the family usually. When we get to teenage years, we then start having a voice of our own. We want to modify what we've been given to be more us, more unique to us as individuals. When we're looking at doing that to a lesser or greater degree, the system, the family, the people who gave us those messages of how the world works, that might be a bit contentious because we are trying to change it, adapt, and grow it in our own world. And that might come into conflict with that world that they've given us. And that's why teenage years can sometimes be very awkward and very conflict orientated, because the young person who's growing up is trying to get their world, and the people who gave us that world are saying, no, you can't have that world, you need to have our world. So that process of them two worlds colliding, in a sense, the one that's maturing, the one that's growing, developing, and the one that's been there all the time, that can cause a lot of upset for both people. The person growing up, the teenager, and the family or the people that gave us those ideas. That conflict that it can create might not come at 11, 12, might come at 15, 16, 17, 18. It doesn't have a time frame necessarily on it. It depends on the individual. But it will create a process of possible arguments, possible conflict, certainly some aspects of challenge, definitely, with what's happening. And the young people don't necessarily work that well with it. Well, adults don't either, to be fair. So when we're looking at that process of growing through those years, growing through that aspect, there's a lot of insecurity around those early teenage years, definitely. Young people who I work with in that teenager kind of spectrum, there's a lot of pressure on them nowadays, far more than when I was a teenager, although some of the pressures would have been the same. But there seems to be a lot more about what you're going to do when you're this, what you're going to do when you're that, when are you going to go to university, where are you going to go to university, what subjects are you going to take. There's a whole range of forward planning process about how you should or should not live your life. And that creates an insecurity. Now, I say an insecurity because anything that changes in our world has, by the very nature of change, an insecurity around it, because we don't know what that change is going to look like. We don't know the outcome of it. So there's an insecurity in change naturally. And that's not weird. That's normal. So when the young people are trying to assess that next step in growing up, being more adult than they used to be, and I said that usually is around the time when they go to big school, as we call it, to get onto that 11, 12-year-old process. Things change dramatically. Usually we come from some kind of educational school where it may have been one class that you stayed in, for example, and you may have had one teacher all the way through. And then we move into this very big, usually academies and those kind of things where they can have 1, 2, 3,000 pupils sometimes. So we're not in the same place. We have to move classrooms. We have to find our way around. Now, hopefully, schools give us accommodating processes of change. So they might give us open days before we go to school so we can find our way around. We know where things are. So we can kind of acclimatise to it. And they might give us social processes where we can maybe meet some of the people that's going to be in our class, our group, our subjects. So we try and do that transition in a much more organised way nowadays, hopefully. But we still have a very nature of it being completely different school, sometimes completely different people come in. Our friends sometimes go to another school that we had at primary school. So it's not going to be the same. Now that's one kind of insecurity, the educational system. The second insecurity is there's more planning for the future. There's more, what are you going to do when you're 13, 14, 15, subject matters? Where are you going to go? How is that going to look? And that's really hard for any of us to take on board. I certainly didn't know what I wanted to do, really, until I was 14. I started going down this counselling therapist route. So that really is when I found myself, if you like. Before then, I'd just done things, fallen into things sometimes, which were really good, not kind of trashing that process, but I didn't really know me fully because of all those other pressures on me. So as we go through that growing up process, that 11, 12, 13 to 18 kind of thing, and sometimes on from that with university, that's not really feeling as though we're in charge. We don't really feel we're in control because we're always trying to accommodate, trying to fit in, trying to be part of something, much more than when we were younger usually. As we're going down that route of insecurity, then our bodies are insecure. They're changing. Puberty, ways of kind of developing our bodily sexual processes are changing enormously through that process. Our brains are usually changing enormously as well, and our bodies, our height, our weight, all those things are growing, developing throughout those years in ways that we have no control over. And when we don't have control over something, that creates an insecurity. And change, we don't have control over. We might make the choice of change, but we don't necessarily know where that's going to end up. That means that we're out of control. And the very nature of that means, again, as I've said, we are insecure. So if we can take those years and start trying to understand them as parents, as adults, in what these young people are going through, then we can see that they're not just trying to be a pain, trying to have a go, trying to challenge us. We can see that it's part of a developmental process. And then it's not personal anymore. It's not this person's doing this to me, i.e. the conflict and the challenge. They're doing it because of the growing up, and they're trying to find their own processes, their own world, their own life, their own identity in some senses. If we can do that, we can take the heat out of that relationship, out of that interaction, because it's not personal. And if it's not personal, then we can relax with it a bit more. It might still create conflict and challenge, but not necessarily emotionally charged, more as a logical process of development. As we're doing that, it's really helpful as parents, as adults, to kind of look back and see what we were like at that age. And you will see a lot of the similar kind of traits. You will see the processes of challenge, of change, of trying to be the individual. That's kind of normal. That's not just your child, that's every child. And that's you as well when you were that young person. So if we can kind of put those ideas in, we can then see a way of working with it, a way of helping that young person to feel more safe, more secure, more connected. Because the things we would have needed at that age are the things that they need. Those things don't change. They need to feel heard. They need to feel understood, allowed to be them, whatever that might be. And we have to try as much as possible to understand that and to accommodate that. If we can do that as they're growing through that process, then we will create a much closer, more connected bond with them. And they won't feel as though they're not able to be round us, to be part of our world. Because those ideas of developmental processes of their world, building their world, understanding their world, getting to understand them in a sense, sometimes they need to take themselves away. Sometimes they need to have space on their own, in their own room, generally speaking. Now, that might be connecting with their peers through gaming apps and these kind of things. It might just be finding out information that they don't feel comfortable or they feel embarrassed about asking you about. So with the internet and things of that nature. So as that process of growth, massive growth, is happening, then a lot of young people at that age tend to need more sleep. Now, that's a natural process. So when they're not getting up till 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's not because they're lazy, which is probably what's being said to them. It's because their brain, their bodies are massively maturing and growing, and that needs energy. Can you imagine growing a bone, growing ligaments, growing neural pathways? That's got to take an awful lot of energy to do that. It doesn't just happen. And that energy has to come from somewhere. So when they're raiding the fridge at 2 o'clock in the morning, they're doing those kind of things, and they're eating you out of house and home, that's because their body's needing more and more energy, quite naturally, because they're growing. Now, we don't necessarily see that as that. We see it as, they're eating us out of house and home. But if we can kind of understand about how they are going through their world, developing their process, becoming bigger, stronger, tougher, taller, then that process means we can be more sympathetic. We can be more empathic with that process because we've been through it. This is not unusual. It's not your child. It's every child, as I've said. So we need to talk to them about these things because they've never been through it before. They won't understand it, generally speaking. We've been through it before. We understand some of it. It will be different, obviously, but it is some similarities about sending the growth and the energy and all those kind of things and finding you and being the individual. Those things will be the same. They'll be different in how we are that individual or how that growth is occurring. But some of the components will be the same. And then we can give them an understanding that it's okay to not know. It's okay to be insecure. This is something you can come through. This is something you can find in your world and your life. And you're not bad or wrong or upsetting. You're just trying to be you. Now, when we do that process, that's a fairly weird conversation to have, I must admit. And one that I got wrong, by the way. But there you go. I learned, unfortunately, after I became a parent about these things. So when we're learning about that process, when we're understanding it, the more we understand, the less insecure we are. Insecurity comes from not knowing, not understanding. It doesn't come from understanding or knowing. So the more we can have those conversations with those young people, the more we can share that process of, I get this because I've been there myself in some way. Not, I've been there, I know where you are, because it will be different. But I get a sense of it, I can understand some of it. Then the more likely they are to feel contained, the more likely they are to feel connected and to feel comfortable in that change. And the behavior that they're exhibiting is normal. It's not necessarily helpful sometimes with the challenges, because the challenges could be risky, because they've no idea what the end of that process looks like. And so it could be unsafe, it could be risky. And in that case, obviously, as parents, we need to try and keep our children safe. But we need to keep them safe. We don't need to feel as though we're chaining them down. So there will be some elements of that that aren't necessarily comfortable to live with as a parent, because it may be risky. But as long as it's risky within a controlled process, then it'll be fine. You know, if somebody goes rock climbing for the first time, they're not going to go rock climbing the side of a hill. They're probably going to go with a harness. They're probably going to go with a group. They're probably going to get used to what they can or cannot do, their strength, their processes. So it's about finding that rock climbing, but with the elements of safety and security around them, so they can experience it, but they don't necessarily or aren't necessarily at risk by doing it. So it's about helping them to understand that. And as we do that, that will do two things. It'll make them feel more comfortable while they're developing, learning, growing. But it'll also create a much bigger, stronger bond between you and those people, which will help them enormously feel comfortable and okay in their developmental process in future years when they do other things like maybe going to university, maybe becoming parents, those kind of things. So you've given them a good, healthy process of allowing them to be them within a safe structure. That can be really, really helpful for them, because then they can try things out, they can have options, they can move around with the process, whilst also feeling safe and secure. And that will be a much better developmental model. But they will never ever do it completely right. They will always get something wrong, because we all do. In my world, there's no wrong or right. In my world, there is a developmental process. So if something doesn't work the first time, it's not because it's wrong. It's because we need to tweak it, to change it, to alter it, to adapt it, to get it more okay, to make sure it works better. But if we say something's wrong, we're automatically putting that person down, make them feel less comfortable, make them feel less connected. So we need to give them an understanding that it's not wrong, it's just we need to manage it, we need to look at it, we need to think about it, we need to think how we might do it differently, and then we need to explore it to do it better. There is no perfect. The problem for most people going through this process, certainly from an educational point of view, is they're usually trying to please the parental figures around them. So when they say, what subjects do you want to take, for example, then you may find that they'll ask you. They may find they'll follow in your footsteps. They may find they don't know, so they do what they think they need to do. A lot of people, when they go to university, for example, in the first year, drop out of the subject they originally went to. Usually about a third in the first year drop out or change subject. That's always been pretty much a statistical feature, I think, still is. Certainly was when I was in university. So that process means that we don't need to know what we want to do at that age. We try things, we change, we accommodate, we move, we alter, we develop, we become ourselves. So don't see that as failing if you're that age, if you're going to university. Don't think that because you start off on some journey of education, that it will always follow that you'll be on that. Some people, yes, definitely. They know where they are, they know what they're doing, and they know exactly where they want to go. But for most of us, we don't. I never went to university until I was 40s. I never went through any educational establishment after leaving school at 15, to be fair. And I left school with basically no real pieces of paper, if you like. But I kind of spent the next part of my world of my life being the person I thought I needed to be, which is not unusual. It's what I thought I should do, basically. It's what I've been told I should do, in a sense. But then when I went to university and I started becoming me, I started changing, I started adapting, that process made me a lot more comfortable with me as a person. And I think at that time, I kind of found me probably for the first time in my life, in my world, and found what I wanted to do with my life and where I wanted to be with it, which started me on this journey of being a counsellor. But I don't think the previous years were wrong, and I don't think they were wasted. I think they gave me an awful lot of learning, understanding, developmenting, if that's a word. Being dyslexic, it might not be. And moving forward with progression, with understanding, with awareness, and gave me a lot of my tools that I use now with the clients I see. So I don't think those experiences were wrong or were not helpful. I think it gave me a lot of learning, a lot of things I won't do the same way again, because I learned that that's not a good way to do it. So I think for the first time in my life, when I got to that place, I was probably more secure than I've ever been in myself. It wasn't necessarily financially secure, as these things tend not to be, but as a person, I felt more secure in myself. I felt more comfortable to be me, whatever that looks like. And that's changed over the years. It's not the same. It's always developing. It's always changing. And I think that's healthy. I think that's good. So when we're looking at that young person growing through that insecure process, know that they may change. They may alter. They will alter, to be fair. And that process means that as long as we can support them, we can make them feel okay in those changes, that we will still love them, like them, respect them, value them, then they will be more helped in developing that process quicker. They'll be more able to be them at a younger age than certainly I was, And maybe you are the people who are watching this if you're parents. So growing through that process, give them that security that it's okay to be you. As long as, obviously, it's not illegal or it's not dangerous. When we're growing through that process of testing, of trying, of becoming, whatever that looks like, we will put ourselves out of our comfort zone, which is a feature of the process. But we can still be okay. We can still be fine. We can still be safe. But we might try things that's slightly different. As much as possible with your young people, help them to go through that process feeling supported. And, you could help them develop in that process of being them without giving too much understanding of what them should be like or look like. That's not easy from a parent's point of view. It really isn't. Because we see risk and we see safety and we see all those kind of things, and we want them to be the best they can be. We want them to be safe and secure. But think of your own world at that time. Were you safe and secure? Did you do things everywhere you should have done it? I doubt it. Most people don't. So the process of that developmental insecurity to security is about three things, really. It's about acceptance. We have to accept them for who they are. It's about education, learning, awareness. And then it's about knowing that you're never going to get it right first time, usually. It's a developmental process. And so moving forward, that is going to be sometimes scary, sometimes fearful. Fear is just something we've never known before. It's a new experience that's fearful. Once we've done something, we can't be as fearful of it, I would suggest. So that process means that fear isn't a negative. Fear is just something we've never done before or we don't understand. So I don't see fear as a negative. I give people a process with fear. I say fear is the first step before awareness. Once you're aware of something, you can't be as fearful of it. Awareness is the first step before acceptance. Once you accept something, you definitely cannot be fearful of it. But then you move on to the next thing that's fearful. It's a continuation loop. It doesn't stop. It keeps going all the way through your life. But that kind of face the fear and do it anyway, feel the fear and do it anyway, is true. Because fear isn't a negative. Fear isn't a stop. Fear is just something that we've never experienced or done before. And if we can move through our fears, obviously in a safe way, then we will grow, we will develop, we will become, and we will then be happier and more contented. The more we can be us, the more happier and contented we usually are. I don't think anybody is truly them. I think we always accommodate for other people, how we affect them. The consequences of our actions sometimes explode before we do it. But I think for most people, the more they can be them and be accepted as them, the more comfortable they are. Hopefully that made sense. Please like and share so that other people who may be going through those processes, either young people or parents, they can get some idea that they're not wrong, they're not bad, they're not horrible. They're just trying the best they can, and that's always going to be helpful. Take care. I'm Ian Wallace, the Messed Up Counsellor.